Hello and welcome everybody to the first in our series of events in celebration of Disability History Month here at the University of Wolverhampton. My name is Julian Gwinitz. I'm one of 4 co-chairs of the Disabled Staff Network here at the university. And we're here today to talk about how differently abled researchers enhance the research field. So this is going to be a very lively, informative and inspirational discussion conversation. Now, there will be an opportunity for people to ask questions. So please, if you can, just add them to the Q&A box and we can read those out at the end of this session. I'm very pleased to be joined in this conversation by Dr. Melanie Best, Nisha Givens and Dr. Paul Dark. And I think before we begin this discussion, I think we should all have an opportunity to introduce ourselves and talk a little bit about our research interests, and perhaps a little bit about our relationship to disability, and maybe a little bit about how those two things combine together in terms of influencing our research interests, but also sort of like literally about how we've sort of like gone on a journey and through our many lived experiences. So who wants to begin? I mean, is anybody going to volunteer to go first?
I'll go first, Julian, rather than leaving you hanging. Hi, everybody. I'm Dr. Melanie Best, and I work in the School of Sport at the university. But one of the kind of key roles that I fulfil is as one of the co-chairs of the Disabled Staff Network with Julian. And I lead on some work within the sector at the moment, looking at creating a framework for disabled employees to improve the lived experience of working within higher education. I have OCD, and I suppose that's the lived experience that I can draw upon when I reflect on how that's influenced me in my career and also as a researcher. And my research now focuses on kind of social justice, and the experiences of disabled female staff at the university has been my latest project. And prior to that, I did work with Paralympic athletes looking at kind of health and well-being and how their disability intersected with their performance. And I think that's me.
I'll go next. Hi, my name's Nisha Givens. I'm currently a professional doctoral student at the University of Wolverhampton. I'm dyspraxic, and I also have other health issues. My area of research is focused on marginalised groups and how they navigate through education, and having a lot of lived experience formally teaching and navigating education as someone from a marginalised group, that's helped empower me to keep pushing forward with the types of research I want to do. And that's just me for now. Over to you, Dr. Dark. Sorry.
It's all right. My name is Paul Dark. My original PhD was actually in disability and cinema way back in the 90s. But I think now I'm a visiting research fellow at the University of Leeds. I live in Wolverhampton, and I went to Wolverhampton as Polytechnic as it was then. And I suppose my research interests are obscure little collections, really. So, for example, my last book, which you can't read, was Disability and Postage Stamps. And that's about the 1981 International Year of Disabled People postage stamps. And yes, disability is on thousands of postage stamps from around the world. Nearly every country has done stamps, and multiple stamps of postage stamps. And then the other more recent one is that one, which is actually going to be called Threshold when it comes out. And it was an exhibition of our collection at the Museum of the Home in London, which was of disability-related toys. The collection on display was actually solely wheelchair users. I'm a wheelchair user, so that's my main focus of interest. But there's toys, we've got loads of other toys, different other impairments. And so, but I'm very interested in the idea of collections that both individuals and institutions have. So someone was telling me about a particular company that has an archive, and actually they have a wealth of disability in that, which hopefully I'll be looking at. So I'm not going to tell you who it is, just in case, you know, so you make you buy the book when it comes out. But equally, I'm making a couple of documentaries as well. And the one I think is most important for this is is that I went to a special school in the 1970s that was solely for people with my impairment, which was quite unusual, with a congenital impairment such as mine, which was for spina bifida and hydrocephalus. And what's most fascinating is that in about 1971, Faber and Faber published a book called The Empty Hours, in which there was a role model school of residential institutionalized education. And the irony is that was my school that was highlighted as the model of good practice. So I went there from 7 to 15. So they're my kind of areas of interest.
Thank you, Paul. Now, I think obviously the focus of this discussion is to talk about the positive aspects of disability, and particularly how all of us, or all people with disabilities, have many gifts and skills that actually would make them like particularly brilliant at doing research if they had the opportunity, if they had the chance, and indeed many do. But before we actually start to focus on what those positives are and what more could be done to help, I think we have to acknowledge what are some of the challenges and some of the barriers. So I'm going to ask all of you to think about what do you think are the barriers that people with disabilities face when engaging with research?
I'll go first.
Okay.
I would say the primary barrier is a lack of a formal education, which is a barrier in essence, although I also found it to be a gift and an opportunity. As I mentioned, I went to a couple of special schools because I went to 2, and then I went to a comprehensive, and I left with no qualifications whatsoever. I had 1 O level, but the fact that my first primary special school I went to for so long, they never bothered with educating, and you were lucky to get out with the ability to read and write. But what that meant is you could think for yourself. And I think one of the barriers probably for all people now is the way education teaches people what to think, not how to think. And it doesn't give people those kind of critical skills, which actually not having an education of any significance was a real opportunity really for me, that I had to kind of think of ways of thinking for myself. But one of the key things all people should have is a basic education, reading, writing, and to some extent that would benefit them even within primary and secondary schools, is how to research, because I think that's a tool we will use throughout our lives. We don't want passive citizens, and we don't want passive researchers. We want people who are totally engaged in it. And so it needs to be instrumental in primary and secondary schools to get people to think critically. But the barriers are, most disabled people, I know, didn't leave school with qualifications. So the lack of a formal education. Then going to universities and doing that, I went to the Polytechnic quite a while ago. The inaccessibility of virtually every level of it. One of the libraries was down steps that I could never, ever go into. Those things are changing, and that's great. But I think the other barriers are funding, and I think access to technology, and that's primarily rooted in kind of government failures to recognise the full human rights of disabled people to the degree that, say, the UN Convention does on people with disabilities. And the sooner we can implement that to actually ensure that disabled people have as a right access to the things that they need to be able to live the life that they want, including researchers. And those basic things will increase the numbers of researchers without question. I'll leave it to you.
If I come in next, then I think some of the challenges facing disabled individuals when it comes to research are the same sort of things that challenge disabled individuals when it looks to kind of progressing your career in terms of accessing seniority. So there are often, for individuals with disabilities, just operating in a normal sort of day-to-day 9-to-5 job can take more effort, can lead to more fatigue. You might have more challenges with access issues, with form filling in, you know, whatever it might be. And that can then mean that the idea of progressing your career into seniority, where there's a long hours culture within HE, can actually be quite a challenging prospect. Likewise with research opportunities, often you're trying to do that alongside teaching or you know, sitting on committees or groups within the university setting, and that can then be really difficult because you're trying to find extra time, and if you're already being fatigued by what you're doing in your normal sort of 9 to 5, then taking on extra work doing research outside of that as well can be more difficult to manage, because you may need that time in order to rest, physically to rest, or it's just too much to be able to do that. And then obviously the idea of intersectionality comes in here, because if you've got additional roles, responsibilities, so for example, I've got 2 young children, by the time I get to sort of 5 o'clock, my time isn't really my own anymore. I've got pickups to do and bedtime routines to do and those kind of things. And so, you know, our different identities can intersect. And I think that can be a central challenge, that there is such a long hours culture already within the sector. The idea of sort of adding something that you've got to find further time for can sometimes be quite demanding. And I think this is one of the contributing factors for disabled individuals not necessarily engaging in as much research or seeking promotions as readily, perhaps.
For me, it was the acceptance that I did actually have a disability, and getting my head around what that actually meant. So I've mentioned I've got dyspraxia and dyslexia, but I also have fibromyalgia and arthritis and a lot of chronic pain issues. And as Mel just mentioned, fatigue is a big thing. And because my disability is technically unseen, there's an assumption that there isn't actually anything wrong with me, and having to explain continually to people that this is what I'm dealing with is quite draining in itself. And it's trying to navigate through that space. So that was the first thing. And I think there's also the stigma that comes along with it, and you're trying to navigate through a space and find yourself, but also manage with everything else that's being put around you, and having the right support in place. It can be quite problematic at times, is what I would like to just add to what Paul and Mel have mentioned about the barriers.
There's also, you know, there is evidence that this stigmatization does translate into sort of fewer disabled individuals engaging in research. So I've got some figures here that said, published by UKRI in 2021, only 1% of research funded applicants disclosed a disability, and there are lower award rates for principal investigators who have a disability. So, you know, there are some suggestions that there is some prejudice that can exist, which can preclude disabled individuals from being successful when it comes to accessing, you know, grants or you know, having papers accepted.
Absolutely, and I think one of the key things is funders. You know, the ARHC, the Economic Research Council as well, recognising the additional time that perhaps disabled people need, the additional costs, in a way that I know, for example, during COVID, often I know some researchers in various universities who felt that they weren't supported. You know, they ended up getting COVID and they had to take 6 months off, but timescales were so rigid, and actually just those kind of organizations per se need to be open much more to having a greater degree of flexibility. Taking 6 months off, you know, a year in, a year out, you need to take 6 months off because of your impairment. And I think those are kind of essential structural things. I think the other thing, I've always been a great believer that actually one of the more significant things, or equally significant things, in relation to disability engagement is class. You know, because I think often disabled people often are much more working class, in the sense that they're marginalised, come from poorer families, not exclusively, and actually those added things. So, for example, I never went into academia. I've actually started to do it a bit more now, and I'm nearly 60. But when I did my degree, my MA, my PhD, the higher I got up, the more unpleasant, and literally just that notion of unpleasantness that academia seemed to be. I remember reviewing a book of another disabled person that I thought was a terrible book, and I said so. But actually, I ended up thinking, I shouldn't have done that. And I never did it again. And I think those kind of things, and it's not about thick skin, it's about everybody has their own journey to what they discover about their community, themselves, and their impairment. And I suppose the other thing I would say, which is quite interesting, which is I think is there is an enormous amount of research that goes on in disability that is entirely outside of the academic institution. And I think we need to recognise the value of that. Institutions need to recognise the value of that and acknowledge it, because often academia has a terrible tendency to be, particularly in relation to disability and all the work over on co-production, whatever, to be to some extent in the past, let's say, parasitic. And it's not its fault, it's just the nature of the beast. But actually, it's about us acknowledging those people outside of institutions. And again, my interest in collections, disabled people have the most amazing collections of their own histories that are hidden and can actually open a total Aladdin's cave of knowledge if they were given access to the kind of people in academia who could support them. And again, I see that's another role in academic research, is about supporting disabled people outside of the institutions to do what they do better and to share. It's a sharing experience. I hope you agree.
Of course we do, Paul. Some general themes have come out actually from what all of you have actually contributed to this conversation so far. One of the most abiding ones by me is the energy, and this perhaps a lack of understanding that people who don't have a disability realize that how much having a disability drains you of energy, and therefore the need for you to actually sort of like manage your energy much more effectively and be aware of the things that actually are likely to deplete your energy resources, and knowing then what you can actually commit yourself to. Because you will have to sort of like make some sort of like significant changes in your life to be able to be involved in research, to be involved in academia, full stop. And there is a thing called spoons theory, which I know many of you within this conversation are fully aware of, whereby you only have a certain 8 spoonfuls of energy, say, per day. But just doing something like getting up, getting dressed, getting ready, negotiating public transport in order to get to somewhere on time might actually deplete 50% of your energy, leaving you with, having to borrow from other sources in order to complete your everyday tasks. But I think that aside, what interests me is something that I suppose, does, for instance, we know that people by and large have there is a kind of a persistent view. Unfortunately, it's one that's actually sort of like diminishing, is based around people with disabilities as not being as capable as people who don't have a disability. So, and to what extent whether that actually sort of like influences our own mindset. So for instance, we grow up thinking of ourselves as people who can't do things because people consistently tell us that we can't do things. And part of the challenge of actually being able to be involved in academia, to be involved in research, is sort of literally going on a personal journey of actually overcoming that sort of like negative input that's come to you from various different angles throughout your life that may have made you think that you actually start to believe that you aren't a capable person. You almost have to reprogram your mind to actually believe that you are before you can even begin to engage.
Yeah, if I can just jump in here, I think this idea of kind of imposter syndrome is something that people readily experience in academia. And I think what people don't realize is that lots of other people experience it as well. So I certainly, when I started at the university, really felt like I was an imposter. And I sort of only realised through research and through speaking to others, actually, that's really quite a common thing to feel for a variety of different reasons. And sometimes disabled individuals can have this kind of realistic pessimism, it's called, that, this pessimistic view of actually how aspirational they can be, because they've had possibly bad personal experiences in the past, or they've internalized kind of prejudice, that's that kind of thing. Of course, what we have to remember is that disability is such a huge spectrum that how people experience that is very different, and the degree of stigmatization is very different. But I think that this is, potentially a contributing factor. People just thinking, oh, well, academia is not for me, or research is not for me, or, I can't do this or I can't do that. We know within higher education, within society, about 22% people have a disability. And then when it comes to kind of universities and students, I mean, our university, we've got about 16% of students that have a disability and about 6% of staff. So there's a real difference. And why is that? Or is it just that staff don't disclose as readily? And I was reading some information from Advanced HE, which said that 5.6% of academic staff on teaching only contracts disclose a disability, 4.4%, so less, on teaching and research, and 3.7% on research only contracts, which suggests that the degree of disclosure either reduces or the number of disabled people reduces as research responsibilities are added. Is this because of imposter syndrome? I don't know. Is it because of the risk of stereotyping? Is it because they've used up their spoonfuls of energy? I think the thing is that there's a multitude of different things it could be, just as a multitude of different things that it could be for, I think, minority groups or females, or, and so on and so forth. And yeah, I feel like I've posed more questions than I've answered there, actually. But I think there are a variety of different factors, I suppose, what I'm saying, that contribute to this.
I wanted to just jump in now, if it's okay. So I'm going to tell you all a little story. So I was born in the 80s, and I went through school, and like Julian said, and Mel said, and also Paul's touched upon, my school reports always said the same thing, that I was great orally, but written work was always lacking. So I would always say, I can't get what's in my head to the paper. That's all I used to say, because I couldn't understand what was going on. I knew that what I wanted to say, but it just wouldn't translate. I'd make spelling mistakes and various other things. So I was put in lower sets at school. And it, like Mel's just mentioned about imposter syndrome, it kind of stayed with me that I always struggled. And I remember getting feedback when I was doing a course, and it said, oh, she rambles too much. And I just thought, I'm just trying to explain. But as time has gone on, I hit 23 and I went to a different university. I found out I was dyslexic, and then that's how things started to come into play, trying to understand how I process information and how I get through it. The imposter syndrome, sadly, it doesn't always go away, because you kind of compare yourself to other people. But the thing, like Julian has said, and everyone else, we're all on our own journey. Now I'm much older, and I realise that as I am navigating research, writing more, reading more, my journey is literally my journey, and the research I tell is to tell a story from my perspective, and an authentic one of other people that don't get to necessarily be heard. There's an intersectionality with me in that I fall into a lot of categories. I'm a Black woman with a disability, and I'm also neurodivergent. So there's a lot that I pull from, but it's the fact that pulling from that has made my research journey so much better, because I have the lived experiences, I have the stories, and it's empowered me so much.
I would say just about the imposter syndrome, which I always think is quite interesting, as I think, I know a lot of people who do have it and they feel like they're an imposter in that situation. I think the thing about disabled people often is we even feel we're imposters in our own lives, and I think it's that whole next level of imposter syndrome that becomes a barrier that needs a lot to get through, and it needs a lot of support, from institutions, but from the people we know, everyone around us, so that our own lives are valued in our own scenarios. And I think that can be as much a barrier as actually the institutions that may be oppressing us in one way or another. And I think that's worth noting as well.
can I just touch upon quickly the whole COVID thing as well? I think there was a lot, I know you mentioned it, Paul, there was a lot of underestimation around COVID. I got COVID twice. The first time was quite serious. I had pneumonia, and I was in hospital for a long time, and it reset all my comorbidities and a lot of things. And it was then I had to relearn and understand my body, what I could do, and the limitations within myself. And I know that happened. And when I was speaking to the consultants, they were saying that a lot of people with issues, medical issues, were having the same issue, that they were having to reset their mind to how they adapted to the situation. So it had quite an impact on us from the physical side of it and the mental side of it. So there was a lot going on during that as well.
I think what all of you described actually brilliantly is your own sort of like your own individual experiences and you know how you've actually sort of managed to sort of like reprogram your minds actually in order to kind of overcome some of the negative sort of like inputs that have come to you through various sources throughout your lives. But do you think there's like a sort of like this, you know, thinking more broadly here, thinking more generally, do you feel that we are still battling against sort of like existing sort of like stereotypes, or you know the sort of like or some form of stigma that is associated to somebody because of having a disability that we are constantly having to challenge and constantly having to overcome?
I think yes is probably the answer. Yes, I think some of that still exists, but I think it's a changing picture. I think that it's an increasingly positive picture. And I think it's important within this sort of discussion to focus not just on kind of the challenge, but also that you know that things are getting better and improving, and you know there's more disabled people talking more openly about their lived experiences and sharing their stories, and that's empowering, and that creates role models, and you know that gives people you know the potential to then view themselves differently. So there's a lot of good things happening as well. I think there's greater awareness these days. You know, if I take for example my experience as a mum, my daughters talk about peers in their class who are autistic very kind of naturally, and there's no stigma there, and I think we're not born prejudiced. And I think it's really important. I think that the generations that are coming behind, you know, us are viewing and being taught about disability in a different way to what perhaps we were. And I think that's only a good thing. So, you know, my younger daughter, who's 5, had complained to me that it wasn't fair that a boy in her class didn't have to go out and do reading and didn't have to sit on the carpet. And as I opened my mouth to explain to her, you know, why that might be, my older daughter said, well, it's because his brain works a little bit differently to yours. And that was the end of the conversation. Neither of them said anything else. And I thought, well, I don't think I could have put that better myself, really. But that's indicative of the fact that, you know, there's always a greater awareness, perhaps not always understanding, but awareness. And I think that, you know, it's really important to recognise that, yes, there are challenges, but equally there's some really positive steps being taken forwards, and there is a lot of good work happening as well.
Yeah, I had to jump in there because you're absolutely right. And I love the fact that children, especially, are aware, and they, like you said, prejudice it's not within them, it's taught to them. I'm only here right now on this panel because of the support that I got from the university. Now, I'm full of stories, so you'll have to bear with me. 2017, I was medically retired, and I was toying with my degree, and I didn't know what to do. And my personal tutor at the time said, just keep going, keep going. And he met up with me, supported me, and guided me. And this is the only reason why I'm now doing a doctorate, is because through him and the other people, the part of the faculty that I fall under, which is education, have been extremely understanding and supportive towards me and my conditions. Things like, well, if you can't physically make it on campus, we'll see if we can get you on via Teams so you can take part in the lesson that way. And there's a big shift, and I'm so positive because events like this and panels and working groups of what's building the future for us. And I think it's going to make it so much easier for the next generation coming through knowing that the foundations have been laid and they can now continue on with that.
I'll throw in a bit of a doom mongering thing. I think it's true what you've both said, but equally I think there is a real danger that we are on the road to going backwards. I think, for example, if you look at the kind of the fact sheet that's part of the UK Disability History Month, it talks about segregation in schools, which is higher in 2023 than it has ever been. Segregated teaching. You know, when I was going in the 70s, it was about 78,000 to 135,000. You're now talking about nearly 200,000 people being segregated educationally. Plus, you're talking about, over the last couple of years in particular, enormous numbers of disabled people have been thrown off of welfare support that they need. You know, PIP cuts, PIP changes in rules, motability changes, the delays in public transport access is a real problem that I think is going to affect the future. We may not have felt it now, but it is going to come in significantly. And I think we are in a very dangerous moment of stepping way back to a past that we thought we had long forgotten, to the extent that I think often, you know, I work a lot in arts, people are having to reinvent the wheel over and over and over again to make the point about the value of disabled people in a way that we didn't that we haven't for 10 years. You know, 30 years ago when I started, you know, there was amazing stuff, and then it sort of, you had to do it again about 10 years after that, and now we're having to start to do it again. And I am anxious, not particularly for me, you know, I'm too old, but I think lots of younger disabled people, it's going to be a real struggle the way austerity has devastated a vast number of disabled people's lives who would have been the leaders in disability research in the 10 years to come.
I think I might kind of jump in. I agree with what Paul's saying. I think as well, it's not just about the kind of financial resourcing, but also it's about the people that students meet, or the individuals like Nisha's explaining. It's, you know, those individuals can be really empowering and inspirational and can provide the platform within which individuals can thrive. And you just need to meet, you want to have somebody like that who's your supervisor, or the person you meet when you come to a university. And I suppose the danger is that not everybody is like that. And what we need is greater disability confidence and greater disability awareness, so that people, that is the norm. You know, I would like to think that if a student came across me and was asking me about, you know, coming to study at the university or needed support in class and had a disability, that I would be accommodating of that I'd listen, I'd be empathetic, I'd, you know, go out of my way to try and help them. And I'd like to think that my colleagues would do that as well. I think there is much more awareness now in the university in terms of things to do with inclusion and so on. But there's also work to be done, undoubtedly. You know, that it's not just financial challenges, there's the challenge of making sure that people, no matter who you meet, you get that kind of experience, rather than it being a bit of a lottery depending on who that person might be.
Absolutely. And I think, but equally, financial changes in education will just mean that people that could have been facilitated in the past won't be now. And that's not the institution's fault. It's just the nature of how society's evolved over the last 15 years, you know, so, and fees as well, etc. I'm old enough, they paid me to go to university. So, you know, different days.
I'm very keen at some point that we can actually draw this conversation so that we actually begin to talk about the positive aspects, and how we can actually talk about how being, not only can having a disability not actually prevent you from actually succeeding and certainly sort of engaging in academia and certainly within research, but it can actually be perhaps a benefit in some way. But before I do that, I just want to draw on what's been talked about so far, because I think what you were saying there earlier, Nisha, about your experiences is testimony to the power that individuals can have on people's lives, and how that one person who can take a keen interest in you and actually see within you perhaps what you're not able to understand yourself, can have a real positive and empowering impact on people's lives. And sadly, there aren't really enough people like that active to sort of like have those sort of like changing experiences for many numbers of people. But I just want to go back to the issue about awareness, because I think we use the word awareness a lot, and perhaps sometimes a little bit too much. And we think it's kind of a cure-all for almost absolutely everything. And I can talk about my own personal experience and say that in some respects, awareness has actually turned the clock a bit backwards to go along with what Paul was saying. So for instance, around about 10 years ago, if I said to somebody I'm autistic, they wouldn't have really known what that was. And I would have had the opportunity to actually explain to them in a way that made sense to me, and actually was in a very positive way and painted a very positive experience of my life as an autistic person. However, now I don't get that opportunity anymore, because now when I say to somebody, I'm autistic, people immediately assume they know what that means. And they will maybe sort of like question whether I actually fit their understanding, or whatever image that they've seen through TV or representations of autism, about whether that model matches me, and whether I'm conform to their sort of expectations in a sense. And awareness has played a really big part in actually creating that situation. So I feel that we, in some respects, that might just be my own personal experience, but I feel some respects we need to actually go beyond awareness, and going beyond awareness would actually unlock the key to maybe having more experiences where more people are able to help and assist people with disabilities to become the best versions of themselves. Any thoughts, anyone?
Yes, I think that probably one of the things I've always tried to articulate is that I think awareness has its limits, particularly in relation to disability. But I think the biggest problem is, and it's what we need to do next, probably before we can really transcend oppression, is actually an awareness, to create awareness amongst the non-disabled of their own identities, in the sense that normal is as constructed and delusional as any other identity, and what we don't do enough of is undermine or demolish, if you want to see it in a negative way, or you can see it as kind of liberating the kind of the normal mind, the normal body, which doesn't exist, from its own delusions, so that we can then go beyond awareness of disability to see how we are all interdependent. We all have significant issues, structural, personal, pathological, that are barriers to all of us, that can really transform the whole nature of society, rather than, and class as well. And I think awareness needs to be, you need awareness classes in normality, actually, to get people to understand what that is and how that defines their lives, often as destructively as it has for disabled people in the past. How's that for an idea?
Sorry, I muted myself. I think that's a good point to actually extend the conversation, and open up other people to join in. Nisha,
Sorry, I realised I was talking, but I was on mute. I mean, yeah, workshops on normality. Imagine that. That'd be a bit radical, wouldn't it? Yeah, and kind of going back to what you were saying before, Julian, I think what we are seeing is actually some positive steps forward. We're starting to see organisations like GCHQ actively recruiting individuals, females who are neurodivergent. There are starting to be a greater understanding. I think in some ways it's about kind of, well, what model do we adopt within society, and what messages do we share within society? And as academics, actually, we're partly responsible for making sure that the positive messages are shared, and that we push for policy changes and all those sorts of things. The affirmation model of disability is something that I think we need to mention, rather than seeing disability as something that's problematic. Actually, disability can equal advantage, and that's indeed why you've got these organisations like GCHQ that are actively looking for individuals who are going to be fantastic employees for them. And I think that it's about changing the discourse a little bit, so that rather than the focus being on how do we overcome the disability and what do we need to do to help, towards actually what can we learn from you, and the fact that your brain might work differently, or you think differently, and what skills do you bring, and what can you share to the group to actually enhance other people's practices, so that diversity is celebrated rather than problematized. And I hope that's something I want us to see more and more of, the recognition that disability is actually not necessarily a negative thing, but can in many ways be really fantastic. And this idea away from normality altogether, that it's not like you're normal, or because you've got a disability, you're not normal. Who's normal? In my opinion, everybody has some form of disability. If you can't cook, that's not classed as a disability, but if you can't walk, it is. Well, throw out the notion of normalcy altogether, and focus on celebrating everybody's difference and what we can learn from one another. Perhaps that's a bit of a pipe dream, but I think that for me is what, as an individual, work towards your strengths. Don't be put off by things that or by other people, and look to achieve your goals and surround yourself with the right people who are going to help you, really.
I often say that my disability is my superpower. It enables me to produce work that others may not be able to do. I look at things differently. I come at it from a different scope. It may be cliche. I was given lemons, so I made lemonade, and I threw in a shot of tequila just to give it an extra kick, because that's how I maneuver through life. I understand my limitations, and I'm not going to let that hold me back from doing what I do. So roughly, I'm rubbish in the morning. Mornings are not my good time. So evenings are better for me. I took the situation I was in and I changed it to adapt around myself. And what I'd like to see in my utopian world is that other people who are disabled are given the opportunity to use what they have around them. And what Paul's mentioned about austerity and things like that, it's quite scary for those that are coming up. However, there are things that have helped me. I've been given amazing software. I've been given a desk, I've been given a chair that helps with my pain and all the rest of it. And these are the things that enable me to be comfortable in order to do what I'm doing. And I'm doing a lot of it from my house. I don't have to necessarily leave my house to go and to be engaging with people. And I'm going to go back to it. And it's like things like this, where we can meet and network, where, yeah, we discuss, yeah, there are issues, and we're not going to pretend that there aren't things going wrong, but it's the positivity that's coming from networks like this which will empower us. And I think the strength, for me, it's the element of community. And I think we have to fall upon that, and we need to bring that back. When my family came over from the West Indies, everyone who was from outside of the UK, they all came together to help each other. It didn't matter where you were from, we just helped each other. That was then passed on to us. And I think we need to bring back that community element to help empower and strengthen our position as we move forward. Knowing what like the government are doing and whatever we need, that's how I feel.
I agree completely. And I suppose the other thing I'd say is, following on from Melanie as well, is that I think what disabled people offer in research perspectives is purely positive, in the sense that most research that doesn't have that as an aspect often is really lacking, due to the narrow prism that it has from a kind of like a normalized perspective, that it doesn't have the depth that it should have, and equally recognizing it. So just to give you an example, for example, a lot of motoring histories, this is really weird, a lot of motoring histories or even that go on, say, the history of the electric car. The first electric vehicles were pretty much just post-Victorian times, were electric vehicles for disabled people. It's not in those histories at all. Then you've got the Invacar, the invalid carriages that, you know, I remember. You're all far too young to remember that. They kept some of the biggest companies going. Well, the fastest, the most expensive sports car in the world was subsidized for that company by the fact that they made invalid carriages. Isn't that weird? Massive government grants to give disabled people invalid carriages kept the fastest and most expensive sports car maker in the world going, AC, I think they were called. And what our history, our research, and our lives add to the kind of the narrow prism of what a lot of research is a truly liberating and glorious freeing from that narrow prism that often a lot of research is limited in. And not just on the practicalities, but the kind of whole freeing of perspective. You know, I mentioned earlier about the school I went to, and it was in this role model of residential schools. It never once says, perhaps residential schools are wrong. And again, I'm not saying whether they are or they aren't, but actually you've got disabled people now saying, you know, we need to refocus and rethink that whole premise of that, so that it's liberating it from its own narrow conventional traditions. And that's the joy of disability research. That's its positivities, and that's the freedom that research is being given by adding the disabled voice, just as it was by adding the voice of women, just as it was by adding the voice of Black people. All of those things, if you want it to be good, effective, and the best it can be, it must include us, and we are the best people to lead on it.
Thank you, Paul. I mean, you brilliantly summarised there how diversity actually improves lives for everybody, and not just in terms of actually making research more effective and more focused, and more able to sort of like affect the kind of changes that we all want to see within our societies and beyond. I just brilliant. I suppose, obviously, what we hoped by having this conversation is that we would actually be able to illustrate, for instance, that how people with disabilities bring something very, very new to the table, whether that's through their own lived experience, that either sort of like influences the kind of research or the nature of the research they're actually engaging with, or whether it's whether the lifetime of struggles and barriers that we've actually, all of us collectively overcome, have given us skill sets, knowledge and experience that is ideally suited to academic research. Is this something that anyone else has actually found, or anybody else would be able to talk about in terms of their own lived experience within this discussion?
I was going to ask, what about people who are attending, whether they have any experience, or, you know, if they've got any sort of particular questions around that. I think for me, I think a bit like kind of what Naisha was saying earlier, actually, I think you learn how your disability affects you, and you learn how to get the best from yourself. The same way any you know, whether you haven't got a disability, it's the same thing, isn't it? It's about working to your strengths, or it's about, you know, Naisha works in the evening because that works for her, whereas for me, I'm better off in the morning. And it's about sort of recognizing what works best for us, and sort of following that through. And I recognize that I'm predisposed in certain ways because of my OCD, and that's more likely to make me more anxious about things, be more of a perfectionist about things, and that can then, I can waste time by doing that. And I suppose I've learned over the years to kind of catch myself when I'm doing that, and to sort of recognize that and to try and avoid that. But also, I think there's an element of being kind to yourself and recognizing that we're not all perfect human beings, and actually, you know, we're not going to get things right all of the time, and that's okay, you know. And the best academics in the world, the most, you know, pioneering people in the world are not perfect specimens either. And so I think that, yeah, it's for me, it's about working to my strengths, being kind, you know, if I get things wrong, and you know, pushing myself to achieve my ambitions, and seeing, you know, OCD is actually as much of an advantage as it can be at times a challenge.
Can I just jump in quickly? And I think what Mel's just said is really important. I always say to my friends quite a lot, protect your energy. And then Julian's touched upon the spoons. And I think we can get drained throughout the day. And I think knowing what can deplete you and drain you is really important. So just being aware of these things. And I appreciate not protect your energy is not something that everyone will probably get on board with. But by that, I mean, knowing that if you're going to be going somewhere and planning and pacing. So for me, if I think about this week, I'm only going out on Friday and Saturday to come to university. Therefore, I've already picked out what clothes I'm going to wear, and it's little things like that. So it just means that when I get up, I don't have to worry about looking for this, this, and this. Everything's kind of laid out, but that's what works for me. And it's trying to acknowledge what works for you. And I go back to the thing of just remembering this is your journey, and there's nothing wrong with making sure that you're okay within this. You know, it's not selfish to put yourself first, because how can you help anyone else if you're not prepared to help yourself, and not spread yourself too thinly? So that's all I wanted to throw into the conversation.
No, I think preserving one's energy is very important. You know, I'm amazed most disabled people I know, you can get up in the morning, you know, given how difficult it is, and I wonders why I often do, but we do, and that's what's amazing about us, given everything that often surrounds our lives, you know, and the lack of support, because even where support is absolute, it's not enough. That's just a reality, you know. Even if we are being supported with absolutely everything, it still isn't enough usually. And so the kind of what we lose, how we chip away at our own souls is an everyday experience for disabled people, as it is, I suspect, for a lot of other people. But I think that kind of having an awareness of that and engaging in that, it is very, 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 very important. But we do, and that again is a positive. The positiveness of what disabled people give of themselves is immense and incredible, and to be celebrated.
Thank you, Paul. Thinking for a while now, each of you, we are all the products of our collective experiences throughout the lifetime, throughout our own individual lifetimes, and all of us can draw on positive experiences as well as negative experiences. But Nisha talked earlier about the experience that she had with the one person who took an interest in her and was able to sort of like literally guide her and help her and begin this journey that has enabled her to actually to be here with us now to take part in this discussion. Can we begin to think about as individuals what experiences we've had throughout our lifetimes that we know have worked for us, whether that's specific types of support or particular sort of like focuses that have actually helped us and benefited in some way, but also to sort of like think about, knowing what we know now, what would be helpful moving forwards? What kind of support could we imagine that would actually be transformative and make a difference in people's lives, that would enable more people with disabilities to be engaged in research?
Can I jump in, because pick up on that point? I'm on this panel from a student point of view, but I also have, like I said, previous experience supporting children with disabilities as well. So I've mentioned about this one person, and he is currently my supervisor on my doctorate. And his name, I'm going to say his name because I always say at any given occasion, his name is Dr. Pete Bennett. I only came to the university because of his reputation. Colleagues at a previous job said, "Oh, you know, this is a course," but the one thing about this course is Pete. Everyone kept mentioning this person called Pete. And then I met him and I got it, because he takes you just as you are. And like I said, I've always struggled with academic writing and getting myself, trying to get people to understand what I'm saying. I even stumble when I speak, and having someone that can get you really helps. And I refer to him as my Jedi, and I'm his Padawan. And at the end of doing my undergrad, I said, what do I do now? He says, well, do the masters. And I was like, well, people like me don't do the masters. And he went, what do you mean people like you? And at the end of the masters, I was like, okay, so what do we do now? He says, well, I need you to get writing. I was like, okay, but what? I don't know. He said, just write. And then he said, also apply for the doctorate. And I know there are experiences people have had throughout, maybe at the university or whatever, that may have not been positive, but I've been introduced to some amazing people who have guided me and encouraged me. And one of the things that I was asked to do before being accepted onto the doctorate, was to network more. And I found outside of the university, there are big communities that are of people that do have neurodivergent and are disabled, that are doing things. And I think that's what's helped me get to the point where I put myself in situations that I would not normally do. And if that situation isn't for me, I take myself out of it, because I can only give what I can give. So that's all I wanted to kind of throw out.
100% agree with Nisha. I think, you know, it's about how, like I said before, surrounding yourself with the right people. But what we need, in my mind, is more people talking more proactively and more positively about disability, sharing that they have a disability, not being afraid to kind of own up to that, and to, you know, we need those role models. We need role models. We need our students to be able to see themselves in us, in our staff body. They need to be able to see academia as something that's accessible to them. We need researchers that are disabled to talk about their experiences, because it normalizes it and it makes it possible for anybody to see that as a route for them. And everybody shouldn't, you know, no one should be precluded from going into academia or going into becoming a researcher. And I think those people that Nisha's talking about, you know, those individuals have been so powerful. We need more of those individuals, and we need more talking openly about that. And I hope that I'm one of those individuals that would support my students in that same way. And I hope my colleagues are. I think the more we talk about it, the more we normalise it, the more we educate. You know, if we can each affect change in 10 people, and then they could each affect change in 10 people, you know, that's where you can start to see, you know, a culture change. But that doesn't happen overnight. And I think doing things like this, doing podcasting, all the other things that Julian gets involved in, that kind of advocates for disability, is so important, and being active agents really in sending a positive message about disability and the capabilities of disabled people.
Absolutely. I think it's amazing how individuals change lives of others. You know, I had an individual at the beginning of my journey that was absolutely instrumental, and then coming across other people down that road who've been as supportive, perhaps not equally, but, you know, given the uniqueness of the single individuals that are part of our lives, it is amazing. And actually, to some extent, teacher training should be about that as well, encouraging teachers to be that in a way, rather than just the kind of purveyors of facts, which I think, you know, and again, the job often can take that out of you and your energy and whatever. But I think we should never underestimate that. And I think to try and be that for others is one of the joys of doing what we do. And hopefully all of us achieve that to some extent for others, as others have achieved it for us, you know.
Thank you, Paul. And thank you, Mel, for mentioning the podcasts. Obviously, we need all the publicity we can get. but seriously, for those who are interested, you can check out the podcast series we do at the university that covers a variety of issues around equality, diversity, intersectionality, and inclusivity. Just search for Diverse Hub online, which is d.i.i.versehub. and you'll find it on Spotify and all the usual sort of like podcasting channels. So, you know, plug aside, adverts over. It's time to think about the future now. It's time to get our sort of like, you know, looking glasses out, our high vis sort of like spectacles, or whatever we might use to sort of like see beyond where we are now. We've talked about a past in which had where there were so many barriers, but we begin to think about, from, you know, we've seen the world change in front of us over the course of our own lifetimes. We've seen how institutions have begun to sort of like embrace people with disabilities and to actually encourage us and enable us to succeed, which I'm sure has given all of us a bit of an insight into what the future might be like, or what the future could be like, the best possible future, of course. So as people who listen to the Diverse podcast will know, is that we always ask a question at the end to everybody present: how do we make the boat go faster? And part of that question is basically, as I said, we imagine what the future will be like, and we think about how we might actually get there, and how that we can make that journey as short as possible. So can each of you think, in, you know, imagining the future, the world beyond now, of what that might look like in terms of how we can get more people with disabilities involved in research, and how we can, like, literally be champions, whether that's ourselves or for others, and to begin to sort of like make the case that I think isn't often said enough, which is that if you look at our economy at the moment, we're forever sort of like being told about productivity gaps, and the productivity gaps that largely result in are the result of skill shortages. If only there were lots of really highly skilled, highly knowledgeable people with very specific knowledge bases that aren't actually able to sort of like fill those positions because of lack of opportunities for them at present. Perhaps that might be a thing in that future. So what will the future look like, and how do we get there?
I hope the future looks like lots more disabled people in academia as staff, as researchers, as students, such that the percentage in society is reflected in those figures. Even better than that, for disability figures to not even need to be recorded at all, because disability is just a normal part of the normal fabric of life. And actually, no one really, you know, diversity is celebrated in such a way that it's embedded into our systems, our policies, our processes, where we're just looking to get the best out of everybody. That is the dream. How we get there, well, little small steps, and we're all doing, you know, what we can do to do that. Be good role models, be active agents, challenge microaggressions, support one another, not be knocked, you know, if we get a setback. Yeah, I suppose those are the small things that we can do to try and support ourselves and others, and eventually hope that that's the you know, that's the pipe dream for me.
I would say there's two things, one of which I think is achievable and one probably isn't. And I would say the primary thing to really have an impact in the future is the complete restructuring of primary and secondary education across the board, not just for disabled people, but for all people. That's inclusive, engaging, actually teaches people to engage critically, thoughtfully, because that in itself will liberate disabled people and those who don't think they're disabled in a way to engage much more effectively. But I must admit, I don't see that happening probably in my lifetime. But the other thing that I think that is achievable, and that actually universities and current researchers in positions of research at the moment, brings it back to what I said earlier, which is there are thousands, if not hundreds of thousands, of disability researchers in the community. And it's the responsibility of universities in the work that they do to bring them in, to bring their knowledge, their insights, their work into the institutions, to show how valuable it is, how valuable those people are. And that will bring in more disabled researchers in itself in positions that may not be formally structured, in the sense that often they can be a visiting research fellow. They don't necessarily have to have qualifications per se, but actually that can transform the whole nature of a department by acknowledging and bringing in and valuing all of that research that's done external to universities by disabled researchers every day, everywhere, and at all times.
Yeah, I agree with everything that's said by Paul and Mel. I think we have to also hold space for ourselves, knowing that when we are doing our research, if that's the way where you want to go, be authentic in what you're doing. You know, don't let what has happened to you define who you become. Accept, acknowledge what's happened, reflect on it, but try and push forward it. I think there needs to be some validity in what we're doing, in that if you are trying to tell a story with yourself being centered to it, for example, using autoethnography, it just needs to be, I'm trying to think of the word. Sorry, I'm literally losing my words now, but it's just the authenticity that is what needs to be said, because when other people are reading research or looking at other people that they can maybe get information from, vibe off, pick up from, if what you're doing doesn't hold some authenticity, then it's not going to help push the boat further. And I just hope that more people will step out and just be present. Just be present. All I can throw in.
Thank you, Nisha. I think we have some time for questions if anybody wants to put questions into the chat, and we can read them out afterwards. But I think maybe before then, maybe if people want to actually give some closing remarks, some closing thoughts before we end this discussion.
I'm not sure I have anything new to add, to be honest, Julian.
Well.
I would say kind of similar to what Nisha said, really. Go for it, don't be hold back, don't hold back, look after yourself, be authentic. All those messages again, really. I don't think I've got anything additional to add, and that reach out to people to help you. Our email addresses have been provided in the chat. You could always reach out to us if you want advice, tips, support, etc. Surround yourself with the right people.
I will actually jump in there, because I do think we mentioned earlier I'm aware that people actually taking part in this discussion will have heard us mention earlier about the affirmation model of disability. Is it worth actually expanding on that a bit, so that people are aware of how that is and how that differs from the existing models, so the other models of disability, most notably the social model?
Go on then, Julian.
Oh,
on,
okay.
Do you want to do that, Julian? I don't mind doing it, but you can. Everyone's
I'll
sick of my voice.
I'll do it. So I'm sick of my voice, and I'm sure many people listening might also be. But no, disabilities traditionally, if that's the right word, has been viewed as basically, if you are born with an impairment, then you are disabled. You are disabled because you have that impairment. But people began to question whether that was actually the case. They thought, well, actually, if you actually radically transform the world and how we sort of like build environments, people don't actually have to be disabled by their impairments. Just because you're maybe blind or partially sighted doesn't mean that you can't go into a library and actually find materials that you can actually engage with. The only reason why that you can't is because nobody put audio books in there, or nobody put Braille versions of the books. Equally, if you're a wheelchair user, you should be able to use public transport, and you should be able to access buildings, because there should be ramps. Once you do that, people are no longer disabled. However, what that doesn't do is it actually doesn't actually change people's mindsets. It doesn't actually change people's attitudes towards people with disabilities. For that, you need a model that actually encourages positive thinking. It encourages, it states that disabled people aren't, we aren't victims. We're not tragic stories that should be like worthy of pity and nothing else. That we are capable, intelligent, like, you know, people who are capable of doing a lot, if only we get the opportunities and the chances to do so. And an affirmation model actually builds on this by stating that we have strengths, that we have experiences, that the challenges and the barriers that we encounter throughout our lives, we overcome. We find creative solutions to these challenges. So we build up a unique skill set. We have a skill set CV that is absolutely astonishing in many cases, that many people would be envious of. That we can, if we have the right opportunity, do this. And then slowly but surely you begin to create a positive image of disability, one in which there are people with brilliant experiences, brilliant knowledge, brilliant skill sets that can actually use that and apply that in so many ways. And that's how we actually begin to create a world that actually embraces us and values and respects us. Is that enough?
Good job,
Yep.
Julian.
That was beautiful.
So one more shout out to anybody who's actually listening to this conversation. This is your opportunity to be involved, to have your say, to ask any of us, all of us, a question before we bring this session to a close.
It's like being in class. It's like my normal class lectures when I say this to students. Come on now, ask a question. They're just silent.
Yeah.
I suppose one final thing I'd add is a couple of things really. I think you don't need to be in an institution to do research. That's the first thing I'd say, and it's important to get that across to people. Being an institution, you might get paid, etc. It's nice, but actually, you know, if you're doing research outside, enjoy it, and don't think it's less because you're not in an institution, because it is often as valuable. And I suppose the other thing I would say is do research you enjoy, because if you don't enjoy it, it'll be awful.
Thank you. That is such a brilliant point to end on, unless somebody else has any final thoughts.
Yeah, I was told when I was applying for my doctorate, what the research that you do needs to be the thing that you get up for in the morning. It's the thing that you can't stop thinking about. It's the thing that keeps developing, and finding that and loving that. Like I said, I fight for what I fight for, because like Mel and Paul, the social justice within us, and you, Julian, is to ensure that, you know, everyone is heard and supported. So, you know, even if you're not, like Mel says, just accessing and making it, being able to at least one person to see it, it's that trickle down effect. At least it's working. We can't change everything at one time, but at least if we can do something, one thing, you know, it really will make a difference. And I've just been dropping in the chat links to other events that you can just click on and you can sign up to. So please have a look and support and share within all your networks, please, because this isn't just for 1 month, like Black History Month, like every other month. This is life. This is 365 days. So yeah, please share within your networks. Thank you.
Well said.
Thank you, Nisha.
Yeah.
Oh, sorry, Paul.
I'm just saying thank you. I've enjoyed it.
No, this has been an absolutely fantastic, as I knew it would be. There was never any doubt in my mind, an inspiring and inspirational discussion that I hope many people will actually have found some useful or beneficial, and hopefully will be shared many times when we post it on YouTube, and people get a chance who weren't here today to actually view it in full. We have, as Nisha said, we have a number of events scheduled throughout Disability History Month, all of which can be found on our website, which is very conveniently printed behind me on the screen, which will read out. That's www.wlv.ac.uk/Disability History Month, or one word. So please go there and check out our events, but also check out our recordings of previous events, where you will eventually find a recording of this event itself. We also have a number of podcasts streamed from the Diverse Hub Podcast Hub, which are, discussions that have disability is prominently discussed as part of that conversation. And that's all I have to say. I'm totally talked out. I've used up all my spoons this afternoon. I'm literally just going to crawl off somewhere and just recover.
Well done, Julian.
In time for tomorrow's talk, which is Thomas Pocklington Trust, who will be talking about how they actually help and enable students who are blind or partially sighted to achieve within education. I urge everybody here to actually join that session. Nisha's very, very kindly put a link to that session in the chat. So
Julian,
please.
Somebody has asked, will these also be advertised on Meetup as this event was?
Oh, they can be. Yes, there's
Possibly
no
do it
reason
on
why
there as
not.
well.
Yeah, there's no reason why not. Although what I would say is that that all events that are advertised on Meetup, please be aware that you have to click on the Eventbrite link that's on the Meetup page that will actually enable you to book onto the event. You can't simply just book onto our events via Meetup. That's it. Thank you everybody for being part of this fantastic discussion. Thank you again to Mel, to Nisha, and to Paul. And we hope to see you all again very, very soon for our future events. And this year and beyond. Thank you all, and goodbye for now.
Thank you.
Bye.
Take care.
Bye-bye.
Bye.